morning and welcome to Rising. We've got a great show for you today. Happy Monday. Happy to be back here discussing the news. Hello, Bofta. How are you?
Hey, good to be here. And you had a really busy weekend, I know, with a lot of other members of the press, of course, at the White House Correspondents Dinner.
Yes, I am
always
as well rested as I like to be, usually for Mondays, but it was a very fun time. Got to see a lot of people I know in journalism, including some of our colleagues at The Hill. Took a photo with Niall Stanage, who hosts the show sometimes with me.
Yes.
So it was a lot of fun and also extremely silly, and I have some criticisms of it that I'll get to in a minute.
No doubt about that. All right, what's on your radar? Give it to us.
Well, we will in fact talk about it. Is the media truly the enemy of the people? Now, the media denies that characterization, of course, and protests the label, even though one mainstream media outlet admitted there was not nearly enough scrutiny of President Joe Biden's obvious cognitive decline by the incurious establishment press. It was all too eager to believe Biden's handlers and pretend that the leader of the free world was capable of serving for another 4 years. This all unfolded at the Washington Correspondents' Dinner on Saturday, the White House Correspondents' Dinner on Saturday, which I was honored to attend for the first time in my life. You are all probably familiar with this event, and like me, roll your eyes at the idea of powerful people in D.C. journalism sipping cocktails alongside the people who are supposed to be covering them independently and also critically. It's a very good idea to be skeptical, even oppositional to this yearly ritual, though of course it does remain the case that many people in professional political circles are able to be perfectly cordial, even friendly to each other, while still doing their jobs and investigating, even attacking each other as their jobs require. Such is the reality of politics and media and the blending and intermingling of the two. Even so, there's an annoying self-congratulatory note coming from the press whenever they toast themselves for supposedly speaking truth to power. Here was White House Correspondents Association President Eugene Daniels of MSNBC telling President Trump that the media is not the enemy of the people.
We care deeply about accuracy and take seriously the heavy responsibility of being stewards of the public's trust. What we are not is the opposition. What we are not is the enemy of the people, and what we are not is the enemy of the state.
Of course, he was saying that to a room full of thousands of people who agree with him. President Donald Trump elected not to attend the dinner. But really, the big moment that I think is worth highlighting were these remarks by Alex Thompson of Axios.
President Biden's decline and its cover-up by the people around him is a reminder that every White House, regardless of party, is capable of deception. But being truth tellers also means telling the truth about ourselves. We, myself included, missed a lot of this story, and some people trust us less because of it. We bear some responsibility for faith in the media being at such lows.
Thompson, who is being recognized by the WHCA, deserves a lot of credit for admitting what most of us know to be the case. The Biden administration misled the American public about the extent of his decline, and the mainstream media was shockingly incapable of discerning the truth, even as most Americans, including specifically most Democrats, had grown skeptical that Biden was the right guy to run for re-election. Everybody had the sense that something was off. It was the media's job to chase down that story. Why didn't they? With a couple notable exceptions, including Alex Thompson, who was among the journalists, also Wall Street Journal, who did start asking questions about Biden's fitness. But, you know, it was a room full of people, many of whom I like, who missed that story substantially.
And we saw that there was the admission of that just in that clip. And I think that that's important to admit when you didn't dig deep, you didn't ask the questions. Why was he using the back staircase instead of the front staircase? Why was there a decline in the number of interviews? There were so many opportunities and missed gaps, really, to pursue the questioning. And I think that is partly because there is the reality that some are more ideologically on board with Biden's administration. And there's that piece. And then they just really didn't want to give any steam to then candidate Trump.
Well, right, they thought they were helping Trump, I guess, to explore this story. But that's a really damning indictment because it speaks to a fear that millions of conservatives and independents have across the country, voters, citizens, who think that, yeah, the media is on the anti-Trump team, and yeah, they would help Biden cover up secrets if it was necessary to prevent Trump from becoming president again. That's the exact sentiment that half the country has. And they're right. Turned out they were right. They were right. It was beyond our wildest imaginations, the extent of the cover-up.
Well,
or just the willful blindness about it.
Yeah, and we're seeing more. We know more now, right?
Yeah.
So we're seeing, authors who've been digging deep into this. We just had that interview, a week or so ago. We're seeing more extensive research into what exactly was going on with then President Biden's decline. And so, but I think what we can appreciate about what we just heard, the different sound bites coming out of that dinner, was that we want to build trust. And to build trust, you have to admit wrongdoing sometimes. And you have to admit when things didn't go right. And so to the credit of those who were taking the stage at an enormous event, this is like the Hollywood of D.C., right? I think that says a lot. It's a lot of courage to admit wrongdoing. And I think that's going to help hopefully bring back more trust into the press. We shall see.
I hope so, too. My problem with the dinner, and again, in disclosure,
right,
I attended
give us the
it for
behind
the first
the scenes.
time,
Yeah, give us some
It's a little
scoop.
self-congratulatory. It's a little gross. It's a little, aren't we important? Aren't we special? The Trump is calling us the enemies of the people, but we're good people. We're doing good work. And this is a room full of all sorts of different journalists, some of whom I admire, some of whom I think are absolute hacks. So how can I characterize them, with one? There's no way to describe them all the same. I think sometimes people deserve, and maybe enemy of the people is going a little bit far. But,
yes, it is, yeah.
Yeah, but not serving the public interest is a charge.
Well,
I would
look,
make.
I
But
think
of course,
there's-
Trump wasn't there at all. So,
and
then it was
there.
extra self-congratulatory.
He wasn't there.
There was no.
He wasn't there during the
benefit
first
of
term
yeah.
either. I mean, we're not surprised about that. But the fact that there was no comedian was a little interesting. Like, you didn't have that Trevor Noah or somebody like
You
that.
had to talk to
taking
the people
stage.
you were sitting with. I think longer than you usually do. Again, this is the first time I've ever attended it.
Right.
So I don't know what it's usually
So give us
like.
some scoop. I mean, come on, Robby.
No, just took photos with friends, with coworkers at the Hill.
Nice.
Everybody, has a lot of. It's one too many cocktails, and then you go to events before and after, and it's just.
It's a long day.
It is. It's a long day, and it's. I did run into some people we've covered on the show in a adversarial context, and I had opportunities to make outreach to have people actually come on Rising and be interviewed. So I'm not spoiling who
Some
it
new
is because
guests
I want to
coming.
reveal that when the details
Okay.
are nailed down. But I had some interesting conversations with people that are familiar to Rising, who I think our viewers would be really excited to get on the show and have some arguments with.
So basically, you
I
were
was
working.
I was working. I'm
Yeah.
always working, guys.
He was working.
I could have a cocktail or a glass of wine in my hand. I'm still working.
All right, next time we need to see photos. We need to see the photos. I saw everybody decked out,
Yeah.
so that would be.
Well, people can follow me on Twitter, Instagram.
Okay,
I posted.
we can check it
photos,
out.
Yeah.
When you dapper it up and everything.
Okay, I will admit this. I've never had to dress this fancy before in my life. Like, I have a tuxedo jacket. I didn't have the tuxedo shirt thing. And I've always just worn a clip-on bow tie to fancy events.
Okay.
'Cause I don't know how to tie a bow tie.
Okay.
But my friends told me you had to get a real bow tie. So I got a real bow tie, and I spent hours, Bofta, trying to tie it. And I eventually
sorry.
gave up. And I said, I'm going to miss the whole freaking dinner if I have to do
Yeah.
this thing. So I didn't tie my own bow tie. Sorry. That's my
You needed an
admission for the day.
assistant or something, or a sibling to come.
I
in
needed
and
a
save
how-to.
you.
Well, I had a how-to guide. I was watching it online. I still couldn't do it. I blame my left-handedness, but that's not fair.
Yeah. Well, look, next time now you know, right?
I still don't know.
No, now you know not to do it.
Now, next time I know to spend,
just do your
even
thing.
hours
Do your
in
own
there.
thing.
All right, y'all don't care about that. We're going to get to the real news of the day. Lots to talk about on immigration. President Trump cracking down full force, including the arrest of a Wisconsin judge. Stay tuned. More Rising right after this.
On the first 100 days, what was actually January 20th to April 1st, last year, 184,000 illegal aliens were released into the United States. Under this administration, 9.
Border Czar Tom Homan speaking out on President Trump's crackdown on immigration. A busy few days as a Wisconsin judge was arrested after the Trump administration accused Judge Hannah Duggan of helping a man evade immigration authorities. Now, another Wisconsin judge is now threatening a courtroom boycott over Duggan's arrest.
Meanwhile, ICE officers deported the Cuban-born mother of a 1-year-old girl who is a U.S. citizen, splitting them up indefinitely, as 3 more U.S.-born children, ages 2, 4, and 7, were also deported along with their Honduran-born mothers. That's according to their attorneys.
Nearly 800 undocumented immigrants have been arrested in Florida during the first few days of what the White House is calling Operation Tidal Wave. Social media, as you can imagine, has erupted over all of this. Senator Bernie Sanders writing, "Let's be clear, Trump's arrest of Judge Duggan in Milwaukee has nothing to do with immigration. This latest attack is about one thing: unchecked power. It is time for my colleagues in the Republican Party to stand up to his growing authoritarianism."
Meanwhile, other users are hitting back. Libs of TikTok said these judges are nothing but political activists. So 2 stories here. The judge story and then these deportations of these very young children taking place. Although, again, I don't like how this is being framed as they're being deported. Their mothers, who are illegal immigrants, are being deported. And instead of breaking up the families, the mothers are taking the babies with them. The babies are not being forced to leave the country.
Well, let's go to the 2-year-old who is a U.S. citizen.
Yes.
The mother allegedly said to those who were taking her in during an immigration check-in. So why she was even the one plucked out of the line is to be questioned. How are we choosing which mother and which person is going to be plucked and deported? But that's a sidebar right now to what I'm about to say, which is the 2-year-old being a U.S. citizen. There's a father in the picture too, was apparently petitioning the courts. So the mother allegedly was saying, yes, I want to bring her with me. We don't know that to be true. The courts don't know that to be true because it hasn't been in court. There's a due process that needs to take place. And that's not something that I'm making up. That's the Constitution, right? Whether you are a citizen or a non-citizen, either way, the Constitution does not have a distinction over whether you should get due process. So they should be able to say, father and mother, go to court, have a hearing.
Well, they can
Let's hear it out.
Right, they could go to court to have a hearing over who gets custody of the child, but that is immaterial to the deportation. And the deportation is not of the 2-year-old, it's of the mother. The mother opted to take the child.
Right,
So
but the mother still gets due process is my point. The mother still gets due process.
Well,
and
she
in
would
that
get due process, if the father was trying to take the baby away from her, right, then he would get a court.
No, either
She's
way.
an illegal immigrant.
Either way, you still get due process. You still get. It doesn't
The fact
matter
that you
whether
don't
we
have
want.
a pending custody dispute is going to stop that. Is going to get in the way of the government deporting you if you're an illegal immigrant from the country.
Even if you're.
And
an
the way
illegal
I'm hearing
immigrant.
everyone in media say this is that a 2-year-old is being deported, even though the 2-year-old is an American citizen. The 2-year-old is not being deported. Tom Homan said that, not in that clip, but in a different clip. He said, no, we do not. He said this and I'm always relieved to hear this because I do have some questions about what the administration is doing and worries about American citizens being inadvertently deported and then them not doing anything about it. So it's edifying to me to hear Homan clarify, we do not deport American citizens. The 2-year-old is an American citizen. The 2-year-old can stay in the country, but 2-year-olds don't belong to the state. They belong to their parents, and usually the courts usually defer to the mother, as you probably well know, in disputes between men and women, mothers and fathers and kids. Usually it's the mother's interest that predominates, so the mother opted to take the baby with her. I mean, we can say that's not. We can say we don't like that outcome, or that's not an ideal outcome, but it's not the kid being deported.
The problem is the speed of these crackdowns. So apparently the limited number of even the phone calls that were able to happen for this mother in this particular scenario, if we go to this particular scenario. So part of this is, again, let's zoom out for a second, why this particular mother? So if you're looking at, hey, we're going for an immigration check-in, why this particular mother? Why this particular person in line? We don't even have a reason from the administration as to why they were selected. Secondly, at least give the right to the proper phone calls and the amount of time for due process. That's part of what this country stands for. That's the Constitution. The Constitution doesn't make any distinction, again, between citizens and non-citizens for the application of due process.
Well, that's true, and I agree with due process. I've been saying that left and right. I'm not hearing anyone argue that the process for deporting these people was done incorrectly. I'm sure someone will dig up the information if it was incorrect, because we're being extra scrutinizing of deportation procedures, but this was an illegal immigrant. Illegal immigrants can be deported and are being deported. So Let's move on to the judge story, which I think is another example of media and Democrats getting over their skis on this. This judge has been accused of basically opening a back door to let an illegal immigrant elude ICE custody. It is very common for ICE agents to make to apprehend illegal immigrants at court proceedings because it's a safe environment to do so, because you have to go through metal detectors to get into court. They know that people won't be armed when they try to apprehend them. This was a person who was there for a separate criminal matter, and so ICE opted to make the encounter there. And the government is alleging that this judge actually opened a back door to help the person escape. Now, the judge is entitled to due process, as we keep saying, so they can argue that the government's case is not true, and I don't know if there's complicating details, and maybe the judge will say that's not at all what I did. That's fine, but if the judge did what the government alleged, it seems like a perfectly reasonable thing to charge the judge over.
Well, right, and
I'm baffled.
I think there's a lot of
Democrats
questions.
saying,
I think there's a lot of questions about the whole scenario. So is this standard that you would take them through the back door? I don't know. I don't know, right? I mean, we haven't really heard the full out from both sides. So I'm not defending either one. I think there's a lot of questions coming out of this, and I think that if there was wrongdoing, the judge should be held accountable. Let me be clear about that, right? So we just don't know enough right now.
Then why is Bernie Sanders and all these other Democrats spouting off about it? Isn't this exactly what they get mad about, where they'll say, "Oh, Republicans don't know what they're talking about"?
Well, right.
They don't know what they're talking about.
I think that there's so much news coming out, and so some of this, I think the Democrats do need to pick and choose which one are we going to go to bat for, because it becomes a distraction, to your point, is what I think you're going with. So I do think that there is a distraction because there's too many things, and maybe that's the point of what the Trump administration is trying to do. There's so many things that Democrats were not going to allow you to really get a message in because we're throwing so many things at you. And so I do think that the Democratic Party needs to look back sometimes and just say, well, what are we going to fight?
Sure. I certainly want to wait to hear the judge's defense and explanation, and the judge has the presumption of innocence. But there was a little bit of acting on Democrats. What I heard from Democrats was, well, this is a judge, and this is getting rid of the impartiality of well, just because you're a judge doesn't mean
you get to do what
immune
you want.
from criminal proceedings. Like if a judge stabs somebody, they're going to get arrested. It's not, you're a judge, you can't, that's not
Having been in court cases, that's why I say I feel like I have a lot of questions. Having been in a number of courtrooms around the country for a slew of different trials, sometimes there are safety concerns. We just don't know enough. I don't know what the judge will say, nor if what can we trust the judge? I don't know, right? But I do think that sometimes they have a reason for doing these things that we are not privy to. And so I'm curious to hear the other side of this. Yeah. We'll see what happens. I think
the government has to make its case, but the facts as stated by the government seem bad to me. But I would like to hear the judge's defense, and then I'll make
the government also
based on.
The government is also saying this case with the 2-year-old and giving us their side only. We really have not heard equally from the mother and the father, and heard it in a way where it's what is actually happening here. We've only heard the government side. I think that's part of the problem here.
All right.
I know you're going to disagree with me, but that's all right.
Up next, a slew of new polls appears to spell some difficulties for President Trump. We'll discuss.
President Trump could be in hot water, according to a batch of new polls out this weekend. The president's 100-day mark in office is quickly approaching, and voters are delivering a negative verdict on his performance. Let's take a look at this new NBC News poll. It found 55% disapprove of the way Trump is handling his job as president, with only 45% approving. Plus, the majority also disapproved of his handling of border security and immigration, DEI, inflation, and the cost of living, and trade and tariffs.
Plus, a new CNN poll found Trump's approval at 100 days in office is lower than any president in at least 7 decades. The poll found his approval rating to be only 41%, which is the lowest for any newly elected president dating back to Dwight Eisenhower. So why the dip? The survey found that since March, Trump has lost approval from women and also Hispanic Americans. Meanwhile, the poll found his approval is sitting at 35% on the issues of both tariffs and inflation.
And the current state of the economy appears to be hitting Americans hard. A new survey by LendingTree shows more Americans are financing groceries with buy now, pay later loans. About 25% are funding grocery purchases with those loans, up from 14% last year. Whew. That's a lot. Not looking good. Not looking good. We're not surprised, though, are we?
Well, the Trump tariff policy has, I think, been a massive shooting yourself in the foot situation that has not been received favorably by independents. I know the most fervent quarter of the MAGA base loves the idea of the tariffs, but they have resulted in a lot of shocks to the economy that spooked independents, that spooked new people into the Trump coalition. And look, as I always say, the economy is the main issue. If folks in the middle, the swing voters, feel good about the economic conditions when they go in to vote in the midterms or in 2028, they will keep voting for Republicans, for Trump or whoever the next Trump is. If conditions are bad, they won't. Like, it's that simple.
Yeah.
And so I think Trump really does risk dooming his entire political project by pursuing that policy. Now, Trump has stepped back from that policy and is currently in the midst of negotiating trade deals with tons and tons and tons of countries that will lower barriers to trade, and so make it easier to have trade and have exchange, and that will bring prices down, and that will improve the economy, and that's a great thing. And so I think you could have a very, very different picture with respect to these approval ratings in a couple weeks.
Well, look, whenever you have concerns over recession, you have domestic travel that's weakened. You have this lack of stability in leadership. The way the tariffs were handled, the back and forth, people didn't feel like he had a strong strategy going into those discussions, and that it was very much shooting, off the hip kind of thing. That doesn't make people feel good about whether to buy a home. That doesn't make people feel good about whether to have another child, right? So people are making decisions, looking at the outlook, looking at all the layoffs, and they're really worried about what should I do with my family and our future. And anytime you end up in those kinds of waters, I think that people are angry now because they've felt on edge, and now they're angry. Those who voted for him, some of them are very angry because they felt like you were our deal maker, right? But they also forget that they hired a reality TV star.
Well, what I would say to those people, and what I suspect they know deep down, is that the Democrats have no solutions to any of the policies, the problems you just mentioned, and in fact would make all of those things also more expensive. What is the Democratic plan to lower the cost of housing? Actually, Democrats want more restrictions and more regulations that will make housing more expensive, and childcare more expensive, and education more expensive, and healthcare more expensive. Everything will get more expensive, which is why the business community has gotten so behind Donald Trump, but was sad about this.
Devastated
about this bad
devastated
economic policy. Yeah,
devastated. This is hurting business.
I'm a libertarian who just wants to vote for somebody to be the president and to be in the Congress who's gonna mostly leave people alone and get rid of pointless regulations and fire needless government workers and get rid of pointless government agencies and have pretty low taxes and just kind of have a minimal government. And if we did that, we would have massive prosperity. And it's really frustrating that no matter who I vote for, we don't ever seem to get that. But maybe the Trump people will figure it out this time.
Well, look, this is the first 100 days. He does have some time, and some of the loyal MAGA voters will back Trump. They'll say, look, he's going to figure it out. He's our negotiator. He's going to figure our way out of this. Those who are less optimistic are looking at this and saying, yes, to your point, actually, and I agree with you, that Democrats haven't seized the moment and really getting their messaging on how they're going to help those specific issues. So the problem for Democrats is you haven't leveraged this moment. And it may not come again if Trump does get his act together. So this may have been their moment, and they lacked the ability to seize it. So in that regard, I do see your point of view.
They lack the ability because they don't have a leader. They don't know who runs their party. They're still having an internal debate, I think, about whether to go more
little beef.
To go more left or less left, or on which issues to go left. And their problem is some of their base, their most charismatic, their most popular leaders, the people who actually have a following, are Bernie Sanders type people who want to steer the policy direction even further left. They're up against very squishy, more centrist establishment type figures who I think maybe have some better ideas, but have no charisma whatsoever, no track record of recent success. and have no argument to make against the far left at this point. So I see the party being really pulled to the left in the coming months and years, I think. And that might make the Republican policies even more appealing. People are going to say, well, I really don't like that Trump, screwed up the economy, hopefully briefly, and a couple other things, but I know that if we vote for Democrats, we're going to get far left redistributionist policies.
Well, and I think that's what voters will have to decide is which one are you going to, go with. We still have time, though. So that's what I say. I think Trump's camp could make the most of this, but so could Democrats. It just depends on who gets their act together faster.
I think unlike most political figures who see their polls crumble and never recover, I think Trump could easily recover from these bad poll numbers with just slight tweaks to the policies.
Is it, why I say major tweaks in terms of you've got to help the business community because that's who's hiring. We know that small businesses hire, 50-60% of the workforce. So you've got to find a way to get to small businesses. And I think if you do that, along with a couple of other moves, you're right. I think he actually could come back because he's such a loyal supporter.
The business of this country is business, so said my favorite president, Calvin Coolidge.
A tragic update in the Jeffrey Epstein sex trafficking case. Stay with us.
Virginia Giuffre was the most prominent abuse victim of convicted pedophile Jeffrey Epstein. Now, tragedy struck her family last week after they say Giuffre died by suicide.
Her family told NBC News, "It is with utterly broken hearts that we announce that Virginia passed away last night at her farm in Western Australia. She lost her life to suicide after being a lifelong victim of sexual abuse and sex trafficking."
Gafreys said that Epstein sex trafficked her at age 16 and that Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein's ex-lover and convict, recruited her during her time as a locker room attendant at Mar-a-Lago.
Giuffre also alleged that at 17 she was forced to have sex with Prince Andrew 3 times, something that he denies. Andrew settled for $12 million back in 2012.
Now, Giuffre posted an Instagram photo in late March of her lying down with a bruised face, saying she had just 4 days to live. She said that she had crashed with a bus that was allegedly speeding, but that the bus driver said she blew the situation out of proportion.
Giuffre tweeted in 2019 that she was not suicidal. "I am making it publicly known that in no way, shape, or form am I suicidal. I have made this known to my therapist and GP. If something happens to me in the sake of my family, do not let this go away and help me to protect them. Too many evil people want to see me quieted."
So this is very, very sad, obviously. This was the most prominent victim of the Jeffrey Epstein underage sex trafficking ring. She had, of course, accused Prince Andrew of the royal family. He denied it, but was sort of stopped being a public spokesperson for the royal family after those allegations. She has died by suicide, despite saying she was not suicidal and was not going to go through with that. I'm certainly not contesting the official verdict of suicide, although I'm sure there are going to be people all over the internet saying that she was silenced or something like that, given the suspicious circumstances of Jeffrey Epstein's death, which was also ruled a suicide, and I reasonably accept it is a suicide, but that there are many questions about how he was able to take his own life in prison under, why weren't guards paying closer attention to him, why weren't there security cameras on him, all those things. Now, there are answers for those things because jails are neglectful places where people are able to kill themselves, sadly, all the time. But there is a sense, and I understand why this sense exists, that powerful people who were involved in the abuse of underage women have gotten away with it. We don't know their names, even though we know the perpetrators. We know Jeffrey Epstein. We know some of the victims, like Virginia Giuffre. Who were the clients? Who were the other people who were abusing these girls? Did Jeffrey Epstein? Obviously, he knew. Was he killed to keep that quiet? That's something that a lot of people have asked about. I am certainly not claiming that is the case, but I understand why that fear persists, because he had associations with powerful people, government leaders, business leaders. He had a very problematic for them association with Bank of America and the Virgin Islands. Former presidents. He had met with Trump. He had Bill Clinton on speed dial. Bill Gates was someone who maintained a very unsavory association with him for so long that it actually spooked and concerned his ex-wife Melinda Gates, and it's been reported was one of the motivating factors in her decision to separate from him.
Right, and I think if we broaden this out, I think, one, she was such a courageous spirit to speak out, knowing who these people were and the types of people that were in their circle. So for her to be so courageous and to speak out despite knowing all of that. And then also, I think that this also pulls on another thread of when victims do speak up, there's such a low conviction rate. It's incredibly low. It's something like under 5%. And when they see the toll that it takes, mental health, on the family, the character assassination that often happens if it's done publicly or in a trial, or even if you don't go to trial, especially if you're going against very powerful people, will victims start to second guess really speaking up? And I think that, that's something that I hope not. But I think that sometimes when these kinds of headlines come out and the tragedies that come with speaking out, the toll, and there were multiple things that may have led to this. I don't want to speculate of her mental health at the time of her death, but we do know that others are watching and they're wondering, is it worth it to speak up? And I think that that's also a tragedy in this. If it's discouraging others who might be wondering, is it worth it if I won't even potentially get a conviction? My name's going to maybe get slandered. Is it worth it to come out? Because so often we don't even hear when these kinds of headlines happen because they're not known.
Right, and people who speak up about sexual misconduct, certainly they deserve our support, and they should be listened to. They should be, they deserve respect. I am someone who, we talk about due process a lot. I believe in due process. I don't think you automatically believe or accept everything you hear and are told, because I don't think that's the way to go about it. But certainly victims of this kind of thing deserve their day in court, deserve to have their claims adjudicated, listened to, responded to, as was the case with Jeffrey Epstein, where there was tons and tons and tons of additional evidence of predatory sexual behavior toward underage girls, something he was convicted of once, and then somehow got the kindest conviction circumstance ever, where he could leave this cushy jail to go to work. It was basically a form of house arrest that he got away with. And then after that's done, he goes right back at it, and some of these same people continue associating with him. So their plausible deniability at that point is gone. You can say that rich people hobnob with other rich people, and they can say, well, we didn't know what he was doing, but you knew at that point. You knew after he was convicted of it, you knew.
Yeah.
And you still took his phone calls. That's insane to me.
Yeah, you still decided to be his pal. And the reality is that false allegations over sexual crimes are not common, because who wants to be dragged through this? Now, I'm not saying it never happens, but nobody wants to go through the scrutiny that happens if you do go to court and you're talking about a sexual crime. It's the false allegations that are often talked about in media. It's not common.
Well,
it's not as common as people think it is. It's really not common, because what a woman or man has to go through to make those allegations, and then to proceed, meet with lawyers, spend money on lawyers, go to court, put your family out there. Your name may be out there. You may not get a job. There are so many ramifications for it. It's really, despite all the headlines people see of specific cases, and look, there's a lot going on right now. If you look at what's happening with a particular, Club Shay Shay, and there's, all of those things going on, right? But, and I'm not speaking on that particular incident. We don't know yet. He has not gone to court. He's not been tried. But what we do know is it's just not common. It's not, and it's, I think it's a disservice to many who do have the boldness to come out.
Well, it's not common. It depends what you mean there. You're right that false reports to the police are uncommon. If you actually go through all the steps of, yes, filing a sexual misconduct claim or any kind of claim of violence, false reports to the police are rare. They're not non-existent, but
right,
they're not common.
Not common. Yeah.
But if we go back a couple years to the Me Too era of women speaking up or feeling more empowered to speak up about sexual misconduct they experienced on college campuses or in other contexts, a lot of those things were not reported to the police. Those are just women, telling their stories. The kinds of men who were accused under the Me Too era. Well, that's not the court standard. Those aren't always going to
some of this was
Right.
public opinion. Some of it
Yeah.
you could argue is public opinion. I was referring to
Sure.
making that police report. It takes a lot. It takes a lot, I think, for someone to go to that length. And that's what statistics show. It's not something that false allegations related to sexual crimes are not common. But when you go into the Me Too movement, there's also many who were bringing up things that happened 15, 20 years ago, which then raised a lot of questions of why didn't you report this? You know, there was a lot more, many more threads that we won't get into right now. But
how can we
corroborate that?
fairly adjudicate something that happened 20 years ago, and just in general, even if you want to, believe someone,
Yeah.
show them respect, but you have no independent ability in some of those situations. You know, the arguments over Brett Kavanaugh and even Joe Biden himself and Trump and all sorts of famous people facing such accusations. Coming up next, we will speak to a young Democrat who's taking heat from his own party. Find out why.
I could have quietly voted my conscience, could have followed the party line. But, Mr. Speaker, again, the consent of one person cannot stand for the consent of another.
That was Democratic New Hampshire Representative Jonah Wheeler speaking just moments before breaking with fellow Democrats. In early March, he voted in support of an anti-trans bill that allows businesses to ban transgender women from female spaces such as bathrooms, locker rooms, sports teams, and prisons.
The Gen Zer angered party members, many of whom left the chamber as he spoke. The self-dubbed independent-minded Democrat told the Free Press he's been called a Nazi, a fascist, a transphobe, and a puppet of the right. Doesn't seem to be stopping him. Representative Wheeler joins us now to discuss. Welcome to Rising.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's really our pleasure. And the attacks you've received are quite something. Are you fazed by, you're a young person, a up-and-coming Gen Z. Are you fazed by the level of opprobrium your fellow Democrats are giving you over, I would argue, standing on the side of an issue that has vast public approval, where most Americans think no disrespect to transgender people. Certainly, they deserve respect and proper accommodation, but that not having them in certain female-only spaces, that's a winning issue that Democrats shouldn't be fighting.
Well, if you ran for office in any capacity, not expecting to take some punches, then you ran for the wrong job. You have to be ready to take punches when you run for an office like this. And so does it faze me? No, not particularly. I knew how I was going to vote. I knew after extensive research and talking to people on both sides how I was going to come down on the issue. And I knew it was going to be a controversial one, but a conversation worth having. I think people in my district on both sides of the aisle have said well, thank you for at least starting the conversation. And I think that's what was most important. So no, I didn't, not fazed by it. It's just glad that we were able to start the conversation about an important issue and where the party's at.
And where do you think the Democratic Party is at right now? There is a tremendous, I think, internal conversation having among the party about whether to move left, try to capture some of the energy that Bernie Sanders and AOC are capturing, at least on maybe economic issues. Then you have, more centrist leadership, not really, I think, resonating with the people as much, but maybe reasonably warning that, well, if we move further left, our agenda will be even less popular. News just broke that Gerry Connolly, a national Democratic figure, leader of the Oversight Committee, is actually going to be stepping away from that role because of his health diagnosis. So this is a very senior, older figure in the Democratic Party. And there's a lot of pressure, I think, on the party to go in a younger direction. You're a young person, again, I'll point out. What do you think Democrats should do to recapture independence that they're losing and young people that they're losing?
That's a good question. I think part of it is economics. You got to speak to people's economic material reality. You got a whole host of people in this country who can't meet a $600 emergency payment. A majority of the country. It's an incredible statistic when you really think about where people are at and what that means with where people are at. If we had a candidate that spoke to people's material reality, spoke to the fact that Americans don't feel like the government is working for them in any capacity, They don't feel like they're being listened to. They feel like when a train derails in East Palestine, that nobody actually is there to address the chemicals in the water or even to hold the company accountable. I think people want authenticity, and they want somebody who's going to speak to a corporate captured government in a serious way and start talking about a public sector that will be truly public again. I don't know if that person is there in the Democratic Party right now, but that's what the primary is for.
That leads me to the next question, Representative Wheeler. Could you talk about who you see as the leader? Who do you look to? You came in here very young. You've put more than 24 bills through. You've been working hard for the working class, as you just mentioned. Who's the leader that you look to?
Well, I look to all the people out in the streets who are constantly, helping one another, who are doing whatever they can in a moment where there is very little to do here. I don't think there is a political leader here in this moment. I think you'll find one from the ash heap that is the Democratic Party right now. A phoenix will rise from the ashes, as they always do. But right now, I don't know if there is a Democratic leader. I think that the Democratic Party is in an unorganized moment where they are trapped between two sides that are completely opposing. You can't, on one hand, take money from private prison industry, the finance industry, the defense contracting industry, and on the other hand, talk as if you're some kind of progressive champion. It doesn't, those two things don't compute. And so the Democratic Party right now is having to find itself in a moment where you've got one hand that's, we got to get these dollars, we got to support these donors, and then the other hand, which is trying to say that we got to support the people and the constituents. So I think the Democrats, they have to figure out how they're going to. Democrats largely have their eyes wide shut, is like what I like to say. And I think that they have to find out how they're going to square the donors they've chosen to prop the party up with on a national level with the constituents, and the fact that these donors and constituents have some interests that are not just not aligned, but completely unopposed. So the Democratic Party, I think, is going to have to find out who it is. Who do you represent? Which side are you on? And if they can answer that question, then maybe a leader will come up from there.
So you've clashed with fellow Democrats on some of these culture issues where I would argue that the standard Democratic positions have become fairly unpopular. You've also, I think, warned Democrats not to totally go anti-Trump on tariffs. You said that you're not wholly opposed to Trump's tariffs. Can you talk about the economic policies of what Trump is pursuing and what your thoughts are on that?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I said that we got to be careful when it comes to tariffs, because the American people, they've watched NAFTA, they've watched permanent normal trade relations with China, and they've seen how that's affected their manufacturing, their businesses, their communities. And we're watching the destruction of what made America great in a lot of ways, our manufacturing base, our working class. And I think Democrats are missing a moment here to say, we have for 40 years watched wages be stagnant, etc. And here we are working with the administration to try to make this a better plan so that we can actually reshore manufacturing and get things done. Now, I don't think that President Trump has as organized or as coherent a vision on American trade as some would make it out to seem. I think he maybe in his mind would like American manufacturing to be reshored, but this has to be done in a much more organized and coherent way than I think it's being done right now. So I think both sides are making a mistake. One side is using tariffs in a very unorganized way. The other side is saying that tariffs is bad, no matter how you put it. I think it's somewhere in the middle, where if you could, in an organized way, in an organized effort, use tariffs and other trade policies, trade tactics to get American manufacturing reshored, I think the American people would be fully supportive of that, because they know what's happened to their jobs and to American manufacturing over the course of the last 40 years.
Well, Trump's poll numbers came out, and it's not looking good. Are Democrats, I've got to ask you, missing this moment to seize and leverage the opportunity to get the messaging right and to move people who are on the fence?
Absolutely. The message is great. We want due process for people that are under the constitutional protection of our Constitution. We want tariffs done in the right way so that we can reshore manufacturing in this country. I think that Democrats on almost every issue, whether it be the organization of the Social Security Administration, Medicare, Medicaid, whether it be the fact that people rely on those programs and they're being attacked by people who are taking a chainsaw to them. I think there's plenty that the Democratic Party has to argue. The reason I don't think it's resonating is because, like I said a couple of questions ago, they're trying to fight between two factions that are totally opposed, one of them being the donor class, the other being the actual constituents, the working class base of the party. If they worked with the working class base of the party and came up with a message, I think somebody would find themselves in a better place. But right now, that's not where they are. If somebody taps into that, they will go far in 26 and in 28. That I'm sure of.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on Rising today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. Nice to be on.
Next on Rising is Trump. Well, he says bringing Columbus Day back. Stay with us.
Columbus Day is back. President Trump made the surprise announcement yesterday, reversing one of Biden's proclamations on this subject. Truth Social, Trump wrote, "I'm bringing back Columbus Day, back from the ashes. The Democrats did everything possible to destroy Christopher Columbus, his reputation, and all of the Italians that love him so much. They tore down his statues and put up nothing but woke, or even worse, nothing at all. Well, you'll be happy to know Christopher is going to make a major comeback. I am hereby reinstating Columbus Day under the same rules, dates, and locations as it has had for all of the many decades before." President Biden was the first president to issue a proclamation marking Columbus Day instead as Indigenous Peoples Day.
Meanwhile, some are also pointing the finger at Trump for changes being made at the African American History Museum. The museum returned 2 artifacts to civil rights activist Reverend Amos Brown. Brown described one of the artifacts, a book Reverend George Washington Williams wrote in 1880, as a precious and most historic book and the first history of the Negro race. The museum told NBC Washington that the loan agreement between them and Brown expires in May and that returning the artifacts are standard practice.
Trump had signed an executive order in March to reshape the Smithsonian institutions. He said that the museum had come under the influence of divisive, race-centered ideology. The Smithsonian denies that, however, and the 1960s Woolworth lunch counter was leaving the museum, denying that that counter is leaving the museum. The lunch counter was where HBCU students held sit-in protests after they were attacked, denied service in a whites-only section.
And apparently now that lunch counter is going to stay. That's
Yes.
the latest with this, so lots of back and forth here. The reality is, Robby, is that you can't erase history. And that's what this...
Isn't that what the liberals were doing, erasing Columbus?
Well, in terms of erasing history, when we're talking about removing artifacts out of the museum, if we're talking about the museum, trying to make sure that things are whitewashed, that they are glossed over when you're talking about things like slavery and the transatlantic slave trade and things that happened in this country that many may not be proud of, but the reality is that they happened. Columbus Day is celebrating, so that's also part of what the Indigenous Peoples Day, what they are, backers of that definitely say is that, this day we were here and Columbus came after. And Columbus really ruined much of this for us. And so in the Indigenous Peoples Day, I don't think that we're getting into murky territory when we start mixing up both the museum and then that. But I can tell you that I think that the erasing of history is different. Celebrating is different.
I don't want to erase history. I don't think we're erasing history.
Removing artifacts?
Well, it sounded like it was on loan, and fine. That this guy was supposed to get it back. I don't know the specifics of it. If it's his artifact, he should have it, or if we want it in the museum, we should have it in the museum. I don't care one way or the other. I've been to the museum. It's a fantastic museum. The only thing I've objected to regarding the museum was on its website. It had a indeed very divisive DEI type training module that I've criticized on Rising 1,000 times. Our viewers know this one very well by now. The Aspects of White Supremacy Culture by Tima Akun. It is a nonsense, unscientific thing. It did get taken down, I think, after it was scrutinized. It's not part of our history. It's a new activist understanding of how white supremacy is like a toxin you breathe in the air. That's neither here nor there. I do want to talk about Columbus Day. I am a proud Italian American. Columbus is...
it never went anywhere, so by the way, Trump didn't do anything.
Biden declared it Indigenous Peoples Day instead.
Well, but Columbus Day, it's still a federal holiday. I mean, people can choose if they want to celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day, but with Trump talking about bringing it back, it didn't go anywhere. Like, it's still here.
Let's not pretend that liberals don't care that it has an official designation.
It didn't go anywhere. When he's talking about reverting it back.
Well, you say that Juneteenth doesn't go anywhere if it's not officially...
I'm just saying, he's acting like it went somewhere. It's like, hey, it's there. People can celebrate Columbus Day. People can celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day. To your point, free country. Do whichever one that you want. But the reality is, he's not bringing anything
then
back.
We don't need to have any government designations of any holidays, and we can all, I guess, just show up to work, and that's fine by me. But
well, I think it's important to acknowledge. No, I think it's important to acknowledge, but you can choose. You can choose, and there's already many who don't celebrate Columbus Day, and there will be many cities who may not celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day. I mean, but it's celebrating what they feel you want to celebrate. So if you want to celebrate Columbus, go ahead. It's a federal holiday. He didn't bring anything back, is my point. He's talking about like bringing it back. He didn't bring anything back. It was never gone.
He's bringing it back. Its official designation is Columbus Day.
It was never gone.
By the way, it was officially it was the origins of Columbus Day was to appease an important immigration immigrant constituency community at the time, which was Italian Americans.
Well, now
we
there's
were once
actually
considered immigrants. Now we're just considered white people for some reason. So now it's not DEI to do this.
Okay. So here's the reality. There's actually a study that came out that said that Columbus may not even have been Italian, that he was Spanish, and that he was Jewish, and that he was hiding from persecution.
I think we should celebrate him even if he was Jewish.
I'm just saying this praise to Italians that Trump said.
He's Italian. I haven't read any study about it.
Oh, that's a recent.
He was
recent study.
sailing on behalf of the Spanish, obviously.
Well, there's new material that have come out even in the past year.
Right,
so
why
I think it's an interesting point. Somebody that was hiding from persecution, and then,
Yeah.
I just think it's interesting to learn this new information. And again, Trump praising like all Italians, as if all Italians are rallying behind Columbus right now.
Have you ever seen The Sopranos?
Yes.
This is an important
Look,
episode.
I've been to Italy, and I love Italy. And I love Italy.
When
Don't
they
get me wrong.
actually, it's a great episode.
I love Italy.
The Sopranos is my favorite show.
Against Italians.
And what's funny when they talk about that, how it's not going to be celebrating Columbus Day anymore. So they're a group of Italian mafia type people sitting around discussing it, and they're all complaining about liberal woke. I mean, they don't call it wokeness because this is like 10 years ago before we started calling everything wokeness, but they're complaining about liberals making everything liberal and not going to celebrate Columbus Day. And then the one guy who's actually from Columbus, the one character, Furio, is like, you know what? I never liked Columbus because he's from North Italy. Northern Italy spit on Southern Italy. It's like really funny. There's the sectarian tensions within Italy are totally condensed by the New Jersey Italian descendants who aren't from there and don't really know the situation. It's a great episode.
Well, look, I'll have to check it out again.
Yeah.
But look, I just think that Trump's bringing up another distraction. That's to me what it is. It's another distraction.
But why wasn't it a distraction to change it to Indigenous Peoples Day in the first place then?
Well, I think that was actually action being taken. That's what I'm saying. Trump putting out a tweet or whatever he was doing to announce this, he's just saying as if this is something new. It's not. The holiday didn't go anywhere. So it's a distraction. You're just bringing it up. Another thing to distract people from other things that are very important, like tariffs and immigration and all the things we've been discussing this morning. So I just think it's interesting. It's interesting that everyone's biting on it.
I'm going to have a big piece of pizza to celebrate my culture and the return.
Look, I love Italy. Can you share some pizza?
Yeah.
I mean, just
All
veggie.
right.
Veggie.
Next up, a surprising ending to 60 Minutes last night after the show's longtime executive producer resigned abruptly. CBS's 60 Minutes had a surprising ending to their show last night.
Here's reporter Scott Pelley.
A note on Bill Owens, who until this past week was executive producer of 60 Minutes. But our parent company, Paramount, is trying to complete a merger. The Trump administration must approve it. Paramount began to supervise our content in new ways. None of our stories has been blocked, but Bill felt he lost the independence that honest journalism requires.
Pelley ended by saying that while nobody was happy about Owens resigning, the fact that he did shows that he was the right person for the job. So this is a big controversy, Bofta, because there is a merger going on, and so Sherry Redstone, the woman in charge, is getting a lot of criticism from fellow liberal media journalist people over the decision to, I guess, make 60 Minutes fall in line. I have a couple things to say about this. So I am no fan of 60 Minutes in recent weeks. I think some of their segments have become increasingly totally unhinged. They had a report on Havana syndrome that was one of the weirdest things I've ever seen involving, do you remember this? They had
I didn't catch that
a
one.
whistleblower that they said they were going to disguise her appearance, and they just like put her in a weird wig, and you could still clearly tell who it is. It was so strange. And then this report on the German hate speech policies, which I have criticized on Rising any number of times. Now, look, they should make whatever editorial judgments they think are appropriate. They do work for a company, and when you work for a company, you'll face pressures like this. You know, I know liberals are seeing this as an example of corporate ownership muzzling a editorial or a journalistic product. Is that how you see it?
Well, you know, I think it's interesting that the timing of all of this, it's the timing of the merger, and they need the Trump administration apparently to approve that merger. And I think that's really the crux of it all. And I think that, you know, 60 Minutes is a show that's been on air, goodness, since I was a kid. I remember watching it. And I think anytime that you have a longtime producer, 24 years apparently at that program, 37 years at the company, who's saying I'm not getting the same independence in terms of making strong editorial decisions as we used to, that they should pay attention to that, because that's also what makes people drawn to the show, is that they did at one point, even if, you know, I know the past couple of weeks you weren't a fan of their program, but they have gone after controversial matters over the years. They've had presidential leaders. I mean, they've had so many different winning moments. And so I think that part of what's praised about 60 Minutes and the reason why they've had success for so long is because of the nature of the way they did it. So I think stripping that away, that independence, that editorial eye, is sad for journalism. I think it's a sad moment. But like you said, it's part of the greater scheme of the company, and that's who you work for, and they're trying to get a merger done, and that's business. So,
right, and you ask, or you point out the Trump administration aspect of it all, to which I say, look, I would be happy to live in a world where the government does not scrutinize business mergers, business decisions, acquisitions, but this is the progressive antitrust desire to have the federal government take a greater role in regulating just that, in fighting, you know, so-called monopolies. If you have an ideology that says the federal government gets to review such things, then it will, by its very nature, always end up being political, as it is in this case, as it is in so many other cases. So, you know, I would be fine to say, no, who cares what the Trump people have to say? They can merge, they can sell to whoever they want. But that's just not the world we live in, because it's a world erected by progressives.
well, look, I think that there's a balance in it, right? So to have one company, there's a reason why there's some regulations, is to make sure that not everyone is falling under one company, and that everything's the Google, everything's the Amazon, everything's the Facebook. It's allowing for more distribution. So I'm not anti-mergers. Mergers happen in business, but it's just to make sure.
Competing against each other. None of those things are monopolies, right? They're all competing against each other.
Well, it's my point is that, you know, there is a balance to be kind of struck here. Instead of saying all or nothing, I think that there is some middle ground. We do need some regulations, but do we need? And I'm not speaking. I don't know the details of this particular merger to go into the paperwork like a lawyer. But what we do know is that, you know, there is some government regulations when they make sense. It's important to do, but unfortunately, there is politics in this case, especially because it's the Trump administration, and we know that the Trump administration has sued at one point 60 Minutes for their interview with Kamala Harris after the 2024 election. So it's political,
that
right?
Interview
it's political.
Was edited poorly, in my view. I think they made Kamala Harris look a little bit better, although she didn't look very good in both the edited and the unedited versions of her response to that question. I don't think it's something to sue over. I don't agree with the
Look. Let's be honest. I mean, stuff is left on the cutting room floor all the time. I mean, you can't have 10-hour pieces that are just airing unless you're right, doing YouTube or something like that. I mean, there's a time limit to things, and editorial decisions are made all the time. I mean, you're cutting and editing all the time, and so discernment is needed. And so, if somebody doesn't agree with the editorial decisions, that's why it's important to have longtime producers who have experience, like the producer who decided to leave, because they do have that editorial eye, and they're looking to make sure things are fair and balanced. So
she was asked an example. Give us an example. The question was about the Biden administration's influence over the Israeli government in terms of what they're doing in Gaza, and she was basically asked, well, give us an example of something you pushed back on and you stopped them from doing some action that the U.S. government didn't want, because we've just given them totally full-throated support. An issue that was impacting support for Democrats among more Palestinian sympathetic constituencies in Michigan and other places. Very relevant question. And, right, it was a long, I'm doing her Kamala Harris answer.
I was waiting for you.
We were all waiting for the answer, and then she kind of stumbled through it. That pause where she has no answer was, I thought...
important to keep in.
Yes, important to keep in. And they decided not to. But I'm never happy about anyone, losing their jobs. That's a sad thing, although this person stepped away. Decided, look, it's good to protect your own integrity. If you feel pushed to do something by a company, a journalistic institution, and you're not comfortable with it, that's the right course of action. So I guess good on him for that. I've become increasingly not a huge fan of this product as it is.
Yeah. Well, he was making a stand, and he clearly did, and look, we're talking about it, so saying something. Okay, hope on the horizon for Kristi Noem to get her stolen Gucci purse back. Updates on that next.
Just breaking news, Congressman Gerry Connolly is stepping down from his oversight position and will not seek re-election in the 2026 midterms.
The Democrat said the reason for this was due to his cancer coming back. Connolly had beaten Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez for that top spot on the Oversight Committee. You may remember that story.
This has prompted definite reactions on X. Former Rhode Island State Representative Aaron Rugenberg wrote on X, every Dem who voted for Connolly to be the leading face of their oversight to the Trump administration during a moment of existential danger, knowing he had likely fatal cancer, owes us an apology. They owe an apology to their constituents and honestly to Gerry. What a joke.
Meanwhile, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett wrote on X, thank you, Gerry Connolly, for your years of leadership on the Oversight Committee and in Congress. You've been a fierce defender of truth and accountability, and it's been an honor to not only serve alongside you, but to learn from you.
And she is, I think, a potential person to replace him, as is, I'm seeing a name floated, Representative Ro Khanna. AOC is no longer on that committee, so it might be difficult for her to again seek to lead it, although I suppose it's not impossible. The choice for Gerry Connolly to get that job instead of AOC was, I think, a very clear indication that Democratic leadership doesn't get it. They don't understand. They were picking a senior figure who had waited his turn to be in charge in Washington, D.C., but is of an advanced age and in very, very poor health. They chose him instead of the objectively most exciting, most electrifying member of the Democratic coalition. Again, not someone I personally am in favor of, but someone who can draw crowds and seemed exactly the kind of person you want to be going toe-to-toe with the Trump administration. That would even direct her toward countering Republicans, even if you're a Democrat who's like, I hate how AOC and the left Bernie people go off message and they fight with other Democrats. Okay, well then put them in charge of oversight. That is directed at Republicans. And they wouldn't do it because they have no creative thinking in the Democratic leadership. But now they're going to be forced to have some creative thinking because the entirely foreseeable consequence that it's sad for him, sorry for him, I certainly hope he has good fortune in his battle with cancer and is with us for many, many years, but this sounds extremely serious. It was extremely serious when they gave him the job. The cancer is back. He's not going to continue in office once the midterms come up.
Yeah, and the first thing they tell you with cancer is to reduce stress, right? So it all makes sense. We do wish him, we wish him the best, certainly. And I think going back to AOC, one of the things that she really campaigned on while trying to get into that role was passing the torch to younger leaders. And that did happen in maybe some other committees at that time, but it didn't happen for her. And I think that she, made a statement saying, something to the effect of, I tried. And I think that for her, what is disappointing is that she just can't make headway sometimes into some of these leadership roles, to your point, that would give her even more visibility and give her message more visibility. And is there something to be said for that? That they don't want her to have any more, so to speak, clout than she
they're
already
allergic
has.
to winning. They're allergic to good ideas. They just love failure. Oh, I'm glad.
Well,
I'm
I
not
can't
a
speak to
Democrat.
allergies
I would
right
be
now.
so frustrated.
Well, look, I think it is frustrating for a lot of Democrats who are watching this and who are saying, this would have been an opportunity, like you said, to bring AOC into this type of leadership role. They wanted to go with somebody who had more experience. I think he had, I believe, had tried to get into this role before and had not, maybe one or two times even in the past. And so, but he was a long-term serving member, someone who came in with experience, things that, I know that's a word you dislike because I've been on the show enough to know that you don't like the word experience, but there were those reasons.
Almost as much as I dislike the word expertise.
Well,
it's even worse.
Look, I mean, I think there's something to be said, though, for the decisions that they are making and that they're not paying attention. We had the interview with Representative Wheeler out of, talking about, going against the party with different messaging. And I think that's an interesting interview because when you do speak up and you do say something different, it's not always welcomed by those who have been long-serving members. And I think AOC finds herself in these situations where she can't make headway into bigger, more visible roles. So she's creating her own space, and she's done that really well by we can see drawing crowds, her and Bernie Sanders, Senator Sanders, everywhere they go, literally. And so, look, they're going to have to live with these decisions, and this is an example of it, sadly.
Yeah, well, you don't often get a chance to, when you screwed up in a decision, immediately correct it if you want. So what do you think about Jasmine Crockett in this role? I mean, she's been getting a lot of attention, certainly. I think a lot of this attention is negative attention and has been kind of like embarrassing, but maybe Democrats feel differently. Maybe they think she's the right person for this job.
Well, I think they're going to have to open up at least to looking at younger leadership. So I think they're realizing that, and they made some changes last year, but I think that they're realizing we've got to figure out a way to pass the torch better, and we're not requiring you have 20 or 30 years of service before we essentially promote you into bigger roles. So we'll see what happens with her. I'm not sure what their pulse is on how they feel exactly on the possibility of her. This is all just coming out, breaking with Connolly, so we'll see what happens. But I think that in the days to come, we're going to hear her name thrown in, as you mentioned, in some others going forward. So I think it's interesting, but they do need to pass the torch. That's for sure. They're missing the moment. And they're going to do a disservice to the party if they don't bring in younger leadership, even if they don't agree with everything that they say. You got to bring them in. And guess what? It's an opportunity to teach. That's what I would argue. Do it now. Don't wait.
That does it for us today on Rising. Thank you so much for tuning in, and be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any of our content. We're now available anywhere. You can also listen on the go to podcasts, so you definitely want to check that out as well. And we'll be back here tomorrow, Tuesday. See you then.